Okay, good evening. It is Wednesday, January 18th, 2023. It is 6:18 p.m. and we will now open the meeting for the CDAC, beginning with our attendance, starting with John.
A mayoral appointee.
Brandy Brown, District 3.
Justin McGregor, Secretary, District 7.
Kenya Middleton, Vice Chair, Mayor appointee.
Mary Ann Callahan, First District.
Michelle O'Loughlin, 5th District.
Thank you. We have a quorum, so we can look at the minutes and approve. Are there? Hi, ladies. Hello. Yeah, no, that's okay. Okay, 2 more members have just joined us, ladies.
Marilyn Austin, District 6.
Am I shocking you over there?
Shocked.
Battery. And I put them in, putting backwards.
Mine's
Putting backwards.
Dawn Ciccone.
Dawn, put it down a little.
Dawn Ciccone.
Dawn,
District 6.
put it, Dawn, put it
7.
down.
I'm sorry, 7.
Put it down a little. Put it down closer to your, yeah, then we'll hear you.
I'm sorry, I'm 8.
District 8.
I'm like all over the board today. I'm Sophia.
Don, can you, for the sake of the record, Don, can you do that again?
Dawn Ciccone, District 2.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay. 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 So we will move on to the minutes. Does anyone have any changes? Yes, Mr. Secretary.
So I had sent an email to Stephen and it didn't get to him. It was left in drafts in my phone because my passwords aren't right. I changed my password at the beginning of the year and it wasn't right in my phone, so the email didn't send for outgoing mail. I had a question about the minutes in regards to the elections, if we wanted to put in the contested part of the vice chair, the nominations and stuff, and that vote, or if we just want to leave it as it currently is on the officer elections, who was elected and who they were nominated by. And that is up. I'm asking that as the secretary to the members.
Any thoughts?
I think you can just leave it the way it is.
Okay, then there we go. I submit these minutes.
Thank you.
I'll second.
Okay. So he submitted. Is there a motion to
Oh.
approve them
I'll make a motion to approve.
and a second for that?
Second.
Okay. All in favor, say aye.
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 All opposed? Thank you. Okay. Department presentations, and we are very fortunate because the first one on our list is the police department, and we happen to have Captain Bidwell here. Hi.
Hi, good evening.
Thank you for having me. Just fire away, or is this a question and answer?
Well, actually, if you could just give, especially for our new members, can
Yeah.
you give them a little overview of the program that you are requesting the funding for?
Absolutely. So, like I said, my name is Dave Bidwell. I'm a captain with the Binghamton Police Department. I am in charge of crime prevention. I do our grants. I also am in charge of the Southern Tier Crime Analysis Center for DCJS in New York State. So one of the programs we do is we do foot and bike overtime patrol. Using overtime funds from CBDG to put officers on foot and bike to have interaction with community members. And then the other thing we've been for a couple of years now is trying to restart is the Civilian Police Academy, which we've done previously years ago before I was in my current role. And it's something I'd like to reprise. So what that is people, community members who would want to learn more about the police department, they usually run 8 to 10 weeks. We would bring those members into the police department. Once a week, we would have a class for about 3 hours where we bring different department heads, different police department or different agencies within the Binghamton Police Department. So community members get to do like a meet and greet, and they get to learn who the police officers are, and then learn the different units, the different people that we have working here.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Can you tell us how much you are requesting?
$20,000,
And that would be for both programs?
all three.
All
So
three.
yeah, if we would be able to do all three programs for
The
that.
community policing?
Yep.
The academy?
Foot patrol, bike patrol, and then the Civilian
Okay.
Police Academy.
Foot patrol and bike patrol, we kind of lump them
Yeah,
together.
yeah.
That's well, okay. Are there any questions?
Yes.
I just had one. Hi. I know last year, one of the things was, are the funds used? Like, do you guys definitely use the funds? Like, if it was awarded to you, do you use it?
Yeah, so we've been working off previous years. COVID really kind of put a stop on a lot of things for us, on top of the fact that manpower wise, we're so short. I mean, I think we're on the books for 150 or 153, and I think currently we're staffed at 120.
Oh.
And then furthermore, like for 2022, don't quote me on the exact number, but I want to say it's been somewhere around 175 to 190 mandatory forced overtimes. So it's been tough trying to get officers to want to work overtime, but it definitely picked up throughout the year, and so much so that we actually had to run a bike school. So believe this or not, you have to have a 40-hour school
Wow.
to have officers learn to ride a bike. So it's crazy as it sounds, but yeah, so we ended up having, I think 7 or 8 additional officers get certified to ride a bike. So then they started picking up the overtime. So as the year went on, once we ran that additional school, officers started picking that up. And then when they didn't, I would try to fill in some spots, and I actually had the cops called on me a couple of times over for myself.
Yes, he did. And I was one of them. Which only shows that you have made it very clear that we are very participatory in our community and that we can rely on our police.
Yeah, so for me, another program, so like with those, I equate it to like SEPTED. So with SEPTED, it gets us in the community in a non-confrontational way.
Mhm.
So it's just people talking to people, and I think it only benefits everybody.
Based on that, can you give us a little bit of a rundown on how the foot and bike patrols actually do work? And
Yeah. So we have an allowable area map. So we go off that. And then what I will do is I will run a crime analysis to see maybe where more crime is. And we will try to dedicate foot and bike patrols to that area. But we'll also do is we'll take like so we've had several people reach out and like, hey, we would love to see foot and bike patrols in our neighborhood. So when possible, if they're in the allowable area, we definitely try to accommodate.
And the purpose of the bikes and the foot patrols are to give people an opportunity to actually see and talk to their police. It's not necessarily a threatening kind of thing, but
No,
more
it's
of a.
100% community interaction. So, and most people interact with police officers, they see them because they're on a call, or it's a vehicle and traffic stop, or it's a car accident. This just gives us a chance to just have a normal conversation without there being anything behind it.
It also gives the officers and greater insights into the neighborhoods that are maybe experiencing more problems.
And then I think, yes. And then on top of that, it gives the community, they could put a name and face to who they see.
Also in the school,
Yep.
how do people come to that? I mean, how do you sign up?
So this would be my first one that I ran.
Uh-huh.
Previous years, they would just put out, city website or the police Facebook page, they would seek anybody interested. So we run it 2 ways. We run it for community members, and then we also ran one for like youth engagement. So we went into the schools, we went to Binghamton High School, and then we also reached out to, I think, BCC for any city residents if they were interested in being a cop or learning more about law enforcement and the police department itself. So we would definitely have to come up with a way to, I would probably lean on council members for the certain districts that were allowable. if there was certain people they thought would like to come. And then we would also just put it out. Maybe I would reach out to the news organizations and try to get signups that way. Yeah.
Brandy?
What makes a neighborhood allowable? Like what?
So the formula that makes it allowable, that I don't know. I just know I have a map that's got a certain area in it, and that's the map I have to stay in.
I can actually address that if you want.
Yes.
Okay, so for a service area project with CDBG funds, and this applies to any program that is categorized as a service area project, at least 51% of the residents must be low income. And the other thing is that it must be what is considered primarily it's what's residential. So it's to be a residential low income area. So the issue is that the police patrol routes are very large. So they encompass not just residential zones, but also commercial and industrial areas as well. So what we ended up doing was we ran it through GIS. And we basically said for your percentage low income, multiplied by your percentage of area that's residential, if that's 51%, we will qualify it. And at the end of the day, we came up with 3 zones. If you want to talk about those specific zones.
Yeah, so the 3 zones are going to be so our car posts, we have 2 car posts on the south side, 204, 203. So 204 is one of the posts that's allowable. So it's going to be everything from Mill Street east to the city line. And then when you look at our car post 202 and 209, so it's going to be your west side from the river to Laurel Ave, Main Street to Riverside Drive, and that encompasses both 202 and 209's post.
What about Noma?
So yes, that would fall into the area. So north of Main is also, so that will extend to the train tracks from Main to the train track. So north of Main would definitely be included in that.
Okay, I'm asking because I'm a resident there.
Yep.
I do not drive and I don't see cops walking around or on bikes and
yeah,
we
so
need it.
I could tell you that last year, that 209 post was definitely one of the areas that we did foot and bike patrols. But I could also tell you that foot and bike patrols it's a limited amount of money. So unless it's a beautiful day and I was able to find somebody to come in and do the overtime, which it got better as the summer went on towards the end. But at the beginning of the summer, our individuals who were able to ride, as silly as this sounds, were able to ride a bike. Either their shifts that they work, it didn't work out for when. So the chief will say, okay, we could do foot and bike patrols 4 to 10. At that point in time, all our officers that were eligible to ride bikes actually worked the afternoon shift. So then we had to rechange it. We had to certify some new people. And then once that happened, we were able to get some out.
Okay. I'm sure you know that we have additional housing being built and we're going to have more neighbors and yeah.
So it is one of the 3. So when the nicer weather comes, you will see foot and bike patrols over there.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Captain Bidwell, would you say that, piggybacking on what Brandy's talking about, it's a great program, but it lacks funding. And it also, you're having a problem being understaffed. So these 2 contribute very greatly to what you can do, even if we are to give you this money, right?
100%. So staffing is it's one of the most important issues that we've faced for the last couple of years so like I said, I think we're staffed for 153, but I know that as it stands right now, I think we're 25 officers short for patrol shifts, but there are still, so as long as the hours are flexible and the funding is there, I think you're going to see officers that are going to pick it up.
So hopefully this is a program that can grow. John?
Hello.
How are you?
Good. I have a question about, I understand that in your current role, you haven't been part of the Citizen Police Academy. What has the enrollment been in the past?
I looked at the previous couple classes. I would say the classes were anywhere between 30 and 45.
And how long ago was that?
The last one I believe that was run was 2016.
Okay. Now, given the classes, I mean, are you going to be able to staff those classes with the staffing shortage that you have?
Yeah. So I oversee a couple departments, and then so I would just force people to come in for that portion. So I can tell you that for something like that. So 1 week you're going to get SWAT team. So the SWAT guys are going to come in. There's never an issue filling that kind of overtime, and then you'll get detectives. So detectives, we actually have overlapping detective shifts, so we could pull them off the afternoon. Crime prevention is my unit, so crime analysis is also my unit. Grant writing is also so I would see to it that it was that, but that's one of those things where it's a very enjoyable overtime because it's a nice, easy environment. It's great interaction, and everybody it smiles. Sure. And good conversation.
Now that affects those, 30, 40 people who choose to go in there and learn more about the police department. It also affects, I guess, the people at high schools or BCC who are exploring. And helps you guys with recruitment. How does it help the greater city to have a citizen police academy?
So I think on a city level, I think it just gives the city residents a better understanding of what the police department is, what they do, and who the members are, especially for the residents that get to attend. And so we've been trying to fund it for years. I've written DOJ grants, I've written DCJS grants, trying to get a sustainable funding level so we could run multiple classes a year, just keep it going. So where you run a class every 3 years, you have all these people who put in for it and want to attend it, but then we just don't have the funding to keep it going. Absolutely.
Any other questions?
I just have one because I have to kind of be here to like wrangle everything, make sure it fits in the CDBG and eligible box. So for the police academy to be funded under CDBG funds, it either needs to be a client, a low income client based or low income service area based. For it to be service area based, you would either need to do the academy in that service area or somehow target that area with sort of invitations to the police academy. I've tried this with HUD saying this whole city's LMI, and it is, but they said no. So for example, the way I do the Rangers program, I split the city into 2 segments. Both segments are low income. Regardless of however you do that, you would still have to do one or the other. The other option is for people that come in, they might fill a form out. I don't know if you do that already for the academy. They could just put their address, and then it could be a little affidavit statement out underneath that says, I am or I am not below this level of income. And then they just sign off on that with potential risk of fraud if they're lying, but it's not a big deal. But you have to be creative in that. So I don't know which works better for you. I don't know if you do them here or if you do them on site. So that's kind of the thing, because it's not that they live in a low income area unless you're doing it as a service area. Right. It's that they're low income or you are doing the service for a particular area.
So I definitely think if the funding was approved, I think we would sit down and figure out what would be the best route. Because I think we would want to host it here. So we do the tours here. We could take them around. We could show them the equipment. We could take them into the indoor range. We could show them everybody wants.
I've never been in the range.
Everybody wants to see the SWAT cars and all the cool equipment with the big flashing lights and all the guns that go bang. But like the center in itself is another one so a lot of people don't know this, but in Binghamton has one of 10 crime analysis centers in New York State. You have Binghamton, Syracuse, Buffalo, Albany, Rochester, Malone, Long Island, and is that 10? And we're open in 11th in New York City. So I think Binghamton's very fortunate to have something that very few other areas in New York State have, which brings funding along with it. But not only that, it's 21st century policing. So we could analyze crime trends for the police department. We could tell, we built dashboards for supervisors so they could see, okay, well, in the last 3 weeks, where have the burglaries occurred? What times have they occurred? What car posts were they occurring? So the police department can allocate resources to where the crime needs to go. So I just think that's a neat portion to bring people in so they can see these kinds of things.
It actually sounds like something you could piggyback onto and go into neighborhoods like the Nova and actually recruit people. So it sounds like something that we can actually build on.
Yeah, so I go to every community meeting that I'm ever invited to, as you know.
Yes.
And I just started, so like the East Side just started up a neighborhood assembly. So South Side I've been to, so I'll come anywhere.
This is good to know.
If you bake cookies and you have snacks, makes it even easier, but.
Do you have a card?
I absolutely do, yes.
I have a question. Oh,
Okay.
go ahead. Whatever, go ahead.
Michelle.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, it's okay, go ahead.
So these last 8 to 10 weeks, so do you do it just one time a year or are they, concurrent sessions
So
or what?
for this funding year, we would plan on one time, but say the bike and walking overtime, say we weren't able to use all that up and there was enough left over to do a second civilian police account, then I would do a second one to use up the funding.
How many bikes do you have?
I think right now we have 8 bikes.
8?
We did just buy, the mayor bought 3 new ones last summer. So we definitely have.
Do you
refurbished.
need more bikes? Is that?
I think we're good on bikes because there's the chance of actually putting 8 people out for a thing. We usually try to keep, we always offer it in 2s so they could ride together. So I think as of right now, I think we're good in the bikes. Yeah.
Any other questions? Deb, you've come in. Do you have a question for Captain Bidwell?
Getting funding for the academy. We've been working on this for quite some time.
Yep.
It's a phenomenal program and I would encourage the members of this commission to go. It's great. And by having it here and also having the residents of the various elder, senior communities also helps us qualify Steve for that as well.
Great. Any other questions? Thank you, Captain Bidwell.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
And thank you for your service. And tell everybody in the police department, we said thanks
I
too.
will. Thank you.
Take care. And I promise not to call the cops on you anymore.
Oh, shut.
There was this car in my neighborhood and I called and it was him. Yeah, I mean, I didn't know who it was and it was in a suspicious part of our neighborhood. So I called and then the policeman called me back and said, Captain Bidwell says to say hi. Yeah, they have a sense of humor at least. Let the record, Deb, do you want to?
Deborah Hogan, Merrill appointee. Thank you,
Okay.
Chair.
Deb is now with us and our next presenter is from the Code Enforcement Department.
Good evening, everyone, and
Good
thank
evening.
you for having me.
Hi.
I don't know if you've had a chance to review the data. I did forward some to Mr. Carson. and-
For the new members here, sir, could you could you give us your name so that
Yeah,
everybody
I'm-
knows who you are?
Yeah, my name is Christopher Schleider. I'm the Director of Building Construction and Code Enforcement. And each year I complete a program questionnaire describing the code enforcement office and then do some year-over-year data collection just to keep you up to date of where we are and what kind of status we're in as far as providing services in the code enforcement area. So did share with Mr. Carson some year-over-year data reflecting the amount of work the code inspectors are doing and the number of complaints that come into the office and try to quantify that in a way that's meaningful. Looks like you all have a copy of the questionnaire, but the data sheet that I had looked more like this. And it's just raw numbers.
I do apologize. I thought that was just for the salaries. I didn't realize you were doing that for this. I was getting ready to run
no,
salaries.
It's really, it's just a cheat sheet for me, but if you're curious, we're up, the number of complaints or requests for service that come into the office is up 20% this year, between 21 and 2022. And since 2020, we're up 70%. 70. We have 70% more complaints in 2022 than we did in 2021. So we're very busy. When we look at, how much work each inspector is doing on a daily basis, they're averaging about 10 inspections per day per inspector. Last year it was almost 8. So, they're doing a lot more with the same amount of resources that we had in 2020. So we're, putting our nose to the grindstone, trying to keep things going and, try to keep people from being exposed to hazardous conditions and making sure that either repairs are made or those individuals are made aware of the hazardous conditions so that they can relocate and go to safer housing.
Any questions?
Is code enforcement only for like private housing?
Yeah, and it's as opposed to
Like not like, I mean, like do you do commercial properties as well, or do you just do like where people live?
the fire safety inspection program for commercial properties is handled by the fire department unless it's residential. So we consider a large apartment complex, depending on who's defining it, commercial. And we do inspections there. We do inspections for Binghamton Housing Authority, Metro Faith. We do inspections at Town and Country. Those are large commercial operations, but they are residential units. We do not do inspections at like Dick's or Biggie Tires or,
So if you do an inspection, right, and the place is like it needs this and that or whatever, you guys can identify that, right?
Exactly, yes.
And can you refer the landlords or whoever to like where they can get like services or help to improve their properties?
No, we don't do that.
Does anybody?
We have a housing safety specialist in the planning department or housing department. However, I don't know. The program isn't really geared towards landlords. It's more geared towards tenants and the resources available to them should they have to relocate.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, that's.
I just had a question.
Mhm.
So say if you came out or someone came out to look at a property and you find that there's issues at the property, do you give landlords a certain time to fix it?
Yes, that's exactly right. A typical service would either come in the form of observations made in the field while patrolling or a specific call that came in requesting us to take a look at a problem. So it could be a neighbor or a tenant. We go out in the field, we make observations, determine whether or not it is indeed a code violation. And if it is, we notify the responsible parties in writing. They're given an amount of time to remedy or correct the violation. If that amount of time lapses without corrections being made, then we have to reevaluate the situation. If it's not life safety hazard, if it's a new roof, but we told them about it in January, we'll be reasonable and we'll give them more time. But if it's a lack of utilities or heat or something that is vital to somebody's safety and well-being, there's no option for giving them more time. At that point, we have to notify the tenants that the conditions they're in are unsafe. And we have to, let them know that they need to relocate so that they can have safer living conditions. So it's not really a program designed to invest in neighborhoods or invest in properties or show people where to get resources to make investments. It's really a stopgap between having some problems that could be fixed and do get fixed, or having problems that have gotten so out of control that hazardous conditions were created. And so we just try to stop, people from being exposed to conditions that could have a very serious impact on their health, their life, their safety.
Do you attribute a lot of the increase in your activity to the fact that our housing stock is aging?
I actually think that it had a lot to do with COVID. There are very few calls in 2020. So the numbers are actually returning to pre-COVID numbers. The aging housing stock, it's, over 2 years isn't really aged you know, a significant amount compared to, I mean, the house.
I didn't necessarily mean over the 2 years. I meant over a period of
We
time. It seems like
absolutely have an aging housing stock and, yeah, there's been a lot of investment in the properties. There's been a lot of reinventing the way that the properties are used. We see a lot of rental units now, whereas before we might have seen more family-based occupancy.
Mhm.
But that's just the nature, not of just the housing stock, but of the way that we live as Americans. It's very seldom that you find mom and dad living downstairs and their son and his new wife living upstairs and sharing a duplex on the west side the way they did in the 50s or 60s. That's just not how we function culturally. So that combined with, you know, the burden of taxes and utilities and things like that have caused a lot of people to take those 2-family homes that were once occupied by extended family and turn those into strictly rental units as a way of generating enough income to keep up with the maintenance and costs of operating that home. Sometimes the home doesn't bring in enough income and the maintenance is lacking, and that's where we get into situations where people are living in conditions that create hazards. And so that's the code enforcement office for the stopgap between not so great and dangerous.
and that includes absentee landlords as well.
Yeah, that's a funny term because we don't find that data to support that. I know that's a thing
You
that we
should,
hear
you
a
should
lot.
come to my neighborhood, sir. We have absentee landlords who live in Florida and New Jersey,
Oh, absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
we have
and they are,
we have
they
some-
are,
we have some,
they are increasing.
landlords
They are
who-
buying those duplexes you
Yeah.
just talked about.
yeah. And there are a lot that are right here in Binghamton.
Are,
too.
do they comply?
That depends. Some do, some don't.
Do you feel you have enough tools? Do you have a mechanism that makes compliance a necessity? Do you? Because these things go to court, don't they?
They do, yeah. That's not
And you
our
have no control
jurisdiction.
over that.
That's New York State Unified Court System. That's not us. Once it leaves our office and goes to court, it's outside of my authority to tell
Yeah.
them what to do or how to do it.
How
Yeah.
do we, oh,
Mhm.
sorry. Go ahead, Deborah.
If you, Justin, I go to you.
Okay, how do we know if we have filed a complaint that it's been at least looked at?
We don't ever refuse service.
Because-
If you filed a complaint that we were absolutely sure was just dreamed up and imagined, we still go and look at it and either determine that that's the case, that the grass isn't really 3 feet high, it's 12 inches high. Or we go and we find that it is 3 feet high, but we never, ever say no to a complaint.
I filed a complaint probably in February of last year
Yeah.
about the neighbor's house where the basement wall was collapsing in off the sidewalk and you
Yeah.
can look right down in. And that there's a 2-story porch above it with 6 kids in the house.
Yeah.
And they're now holding the porch up. The tenants have actually just used styrofoam from TV boxes got at Christmas. They've propped it underneath it. That's what's holding up the porch right now. And
Yeah.
I just don't know how that passes code.
Well, see, but it doesn't. And that's my whole point is code doesn't have a mechanism to pin somebody's arm behind their back and make them do anything. We observe whether or not there's a violation. And if there is, we notify the proper parties. If those parties fail to, whether inadvertently or intentionally, bring the property into compliance, then it goes to court or the property could get condemned. Unfortunately, what we're seeing now is despite the fact that we've declared it unfit for habitation and condemned the property, people continue to dwell there.
Okay.
So, yeah, that's, the choice is when you have a code violation is fix it, go to court, or we can condemn the property, but there is no mechanism for us to go over there and make the repairs.
Right, okay. Because this house is 14 feet from me and every day I drive up my driveway now, I'm just afraid that 2-story porch is gonna fall off the side of that house. And
So
come
it sounds
crashing
like
onto
it's
mine.
gotten worse than when you first reported.
Oh,
it.
yeah.
And you're more than welcome to, call back and say, I really think that this has gotten worse. It's no longer at a level where it could sit on the court docket for 6 months. It needs immediate attention. I mean, if it's that bad, we'll have DPW.
Otherwise,
over
there's only one entrance or exit to one of the apartments, and it.
Yeah, you only need one in most cases.
Oh, you do?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah.
Deb, did you have a question?
Hi, Chris.
Hey, Deb.
Few questions for you. In the past, and please correct me if I'm wrong, your office has been a complaint driven versus like a targeted initiative. Is that still the
It's about
of operation?
It's about 66-33. So there are 2,500 complaints last year, but there were 1,300 cases that were initiated by the officer being proactive rather than reactive.
Okay, that helps. One of the concerns I have, because I assisted a senior, is that the programs that they qualify, for example, through First Word Action Council, has been a waiting list. Part of it was due to COVID and had applied for the grant, and it was able to get into the system and filed, but somehow it was cited. The other concern I had is that the mayor this summer had announced that there were programs, and I'd spoken to Steve about this, for like front porch repairs, things to keep seniors in their home. Yeah. But when they call for that assistance, there's a waiting list and they aren't on it, but yet they're getting a citation. So that's what I just kind of need to have a little bit better communication, is that your seniors are trying to go for the programs that they're eligible for, but there's a waiting list. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention if you weren't aware of that.
I don't really know how the improvement program works. That's outside of our department, but you know, perhaps that's something that should be discussed with planning or housing.
That's actually a good point. I was just thinking about that. Something we could possibly do legislatively is, once an application comes in, we could work a system to let code enforcement know. The only problem with that, and I'm sure Chris would think this is the exact same way, is you don't want people abusing that, where someone's just like, well, as long as I apply and just stay on the list.
I was thinking more in terms of if they're applying for the program and they can substantiate their claim with documentation from our office saying this really is hazardous at this point. It's no longer just a wish list. I would like to. I don't know if that's fair to the people who have been waiting for 4 years. You know, but that's, if something is hazardous, it certainly, you know, deserves as much expediency as we can provide. Yeah. I think that the effort was to identify the full span of the process and recognize that in addition to code enforcement efforts being made, sometimes cases hinge on what happens after they leave our office. So if somebody were cited, it's not so bad that it's really going to be declared as unfit for habitation, but it's not getting fixed in a timely manner, then we refer it to the court system. And I think that's where Mayor Cram's program came in. He was saying if we had a prosecutor who wasn't pulled in many different directions and wasn't able really to follow the cases closely, you know, there would be a lack of sympathy and understanding for the importance of the court case. And by assigning specifically a housing court prosecutor who exclusively works on housing court, then that individual would start to recognize the players, the repeat offenders, and maybe have a little bit more sympathy for the tenants or understand the severity of this repetition and the trends that are taking place. And that has an impact on how you prosecute. If you're not remembering that and you see somebody in court who's been there a dozen times, but you don't recognize them because you've been working on so many other projects, you're going to give them the same benefit of the doubt as somebody who's there for the first time. But as a housing court prosecutor, seeing the same person there 12 times is going to maybe, you know, trigger something in your mind to say, oh, this is not one that we want to take so lightly. If we get to the stage of plea bargaining, maybe I'll be a little bit more heavy, a little more insistent than if it was somebody who, you know, was an anomaly. They've never been to court before and somehow they ended up there and it was all just a big mistake. So that was, I think, the intent. And it takes a while to build up that kind of, you know, seasoned experience where you're able to make those judgment calls. But I think that's been a great asset moving forward. I hope that it'll start to, you know, pick up some speed and, you know, really start to take effect.
It's my final question to you. As you know, we had one of our first arrests for a landlord. That person was just in court, about $1,700 in fines. How does that particular and other landlords be followed? Because in very personal, my neighborhood, right across the street and down the street, it's as if he was not in court a week ago.
Yeah, well, that's
how because this, you know, this particular landlord I'm speaking of has properties across the city,
about 160 properties.
Yeah, and as you get your housing court gets in gear and a well-oiled machine, you're going to be having these type of landlords. So does that mean you have to start the process all over again because you've made it to court and you have to, if it's not, I assumed it was under review for up to a year, if I read it
in the court system. Yeah, a lot. And well, I'll just point out that the reason that individual was arrested was not because his code violations were so egregious that we decided to arrest him. He was arrested because the New York State Unified Court District told him to appear and he didn't. Okay, if you don't make a code correction, I'll give you a ticket to go to court and the judges will take it from there. If you choose not to make a repair, I'm not determining your guilt or innocence or judging how it got that way. I'm just saying it's dangerous and it needs to be addressed. The courts, on the other hand, don't think the same way. If they tell you to show up and you don't show up, now you've committed a crime, which is an arrestable crime. And that's why he was arrested, for not appearing when given a criminal summons to appear in a New York State court. So that really had nothing to do with code, has nothing to do with the number of properties he owns, how many violations he had. This was all because he was thumbing his nose at the judges, and they don't take kindly to that. They usually arrest people who do that.
Chris, I really appreciate you making that distinction because myself and a few other neighbors that were talking, we were confused.
Yeah.
And now that it's code and then it gets passed off onto the court.
Yeah.
So do we contact your office again? That's still an issue.
Well, there will be issues. That's this individual's business model is, as we can see, is not one of investment and renewal and renovation. It's I don't know what it is, but it's not
it's not good.
It's not good.
It's not good.
And it's not anything that code enforcement has control over. When people make business decisions to run their business in a certain way, and it puts tenants or neighbors in harm's way, we can identify those items, bring it to their attention, order to remedy, but we can't make them remedy. If they don't remedy, we can condemn the building or we could send it to court.
Ever so much.
I mean, honestly, if you think about it, we're not, like a lot of law enforcement, we're not the mechanism to make anybody do anything. They almost should call us code observers.
It sounds like you're the triage. You actually
We
determined.
just, yes, we
Yeah.
just observe whether
Yeah.
or not there is in fact a condition that needs to be
And I
addressed.
think we appreciate you clarifying that for us now,
Yeah.
because we all know you have a very hard row to hoe. The neighborhoods we all live in are deteriorating at a rate that makes
Yeah.
us all sad.
Well, so is my department.
Well,
unfortunately.
but I must say that I live in the first ward and I see your code enforcement car around, and I've talked to Mr. Stento several times and find him very cooperative. So
Yeah,
thank you for those things that you can do.
yes, and I'll try to clarify, as best I can, what we can do and what we can. I think a lot of times frustration with code enforcement is why aren't there more results?
Yeah,
And we're not really in charge of results.
I think that's-
I don't
yeah.
let the guys throw the garbage in the back of their car. We don't have lawnmowers. We don't have paint. All we can do is observe conditions and put it in writing and document it. So
and
that it-
because you're the only person we see, that's where,
we're the point of contact.
yes, you are.
Yeah.
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 So,
So I wanna jump on this too and give you guys some clarification because we've had some more recent updates too, and it might clarify things. So the bottleneck is the court system. It's not necessarily code enforcement itself. Code enforcement is doing their job. And then if the next link up the chain is the weak one, then that's the problem. That being said, code enforcement is essentially a gateway to actually several of our programs. One thing right off the bat, talking about condemnation of buildings, as soon as a residential building's condemned, that essentially automatically qualifies someone to take advantage of the homelessness prevention program, which is almost always funded through ESG funds, which you guys handle. The code improvements or the rehab programs require code improvements or all code violations to be improved. So it's necessary for code to be identifying those problems, and then those must be addressed. It's entirely possible a project is too big for the funding. If you get into a house that's $400,000 on rehabs just to fix the code issues, we're not going to do it. Unfortunately, it's just too much money when we can help more people with not as many problems. But at the end of the day, the HUD requirements is that all code violations are corrected. After that, we can do some minor things like kitchen rehabs and stuff like that. But I like the fact that we're addressing those code issues because those are health and safety issues. Third is, I'll jump around here. Third is not one we're currently funding, but I've heard it enough to let you guys know. You guys have been talking about doing some sort of program to address garbage. So in cases like that, we may very well be able to pull data from code to identify areas where garbage, citations of garbage on the lawns or too much garbage can be done. We can then identify areas to address those too. So this is how we're able to work with code enforcement to identify the areas, identify the needs, and target them. And this all comes back down to what can you guys do directly to provide anything to code? And as Chris has pointed out in his thing here, they get $250,000. Now, me and Chris and Juliet and the mayor and a bunch of people have been running around in circles trying to address a problem HUD has had with the past way code enforcement salaries are done, because it's a very well-defined method you have to follow to get code enforcement. It must be done in a low-income area, which are defined. It must be for a neighborhood or building that is deteriorated. And that was fun. And number three, we must connect in some way the individuals living in those properties with resources. We have now addressed that. We have not yet done the salary calculation, but Chris's guys are following this stuff, so we should be able to pull that data. I haven't done it yet for the last quarter. So the way we're doing it is code enforcement identifies a property as deteriorated. I will tell you most code violations right off the bat are going to qualify them as deteriorated. The ones that wouldn't would be like, I don't know, your car's parked in the lawn or you've got ice on the sidewalk or long grass. Those probably won't qualify. But code enforcement, when they do an inspection, and correct me if I'm wrong, they will list every single violation that they can spot as they do it.
Right.
So even though one may not qualify, another thing may qualify as deteriorate. So we've got an area. We find out we can geocode them to be low income. Code identifies the property as deteriorated, which is not that hard to qualify for in the city of Binghamton, unfortunately. Number three is the resources. Now, I know you guys, most of you, do you know about that little handout we printed? I showed you the examples of the handouts we've been starting to hand out. So Chris's guys either hand that out or somehow we get that information into the occupant's hand. Doesn't matter if they're homeowner or renter. We get it into their hands. That connects them with resources like the City of Binghamton Housing Safety Specialist. It can connect them to homelessness prevention and homelessness services if they do end up out on the street. And it also connects them with senior home repair program. It connects them with 2-in-1. It can connect them with our rehab program. So that's how we're managing to meet this HUD requirement that code enforcement does this. And honestly, now that we've got everything kind of jumbled around, I think it's moving pretty smoothly. We also created, we put through some legislation. That was what, a few weeks ago, where we took off the costs for the permits.
For the Binghamton Home Improvement Program?
Well, it's technically the way that the code works, it reads, I think it's for any grant backed program.
Yeah.
So what that allows is when money goes into rehab programs, they have to apply for permits. They have to apply for permits, but they don't have to now pay for those permits. And so that just allows us to stretch those funds a little bit further to help address code violations or anything else in the rehab and the project we're rehabbing that it's eligible for. We may be extending this to other capital projects we provide CDBG funds for, because essentially we're just paying ourselves. It doesn't, the money from the permits doesn't go into code enforcement's coffers. It just goes into the general fund and it goes somewhere else. So why waste the money in that regard? So just be aware of that, if that's what's going on. So even though Chris is coming here and he's showing you, these are the things we've done, and this is the money for the salaries, there's a reason for all of this. Code enforcement is almost like a linchpin. I mean, I would say between planning, my department, and code, we're the linchpin for most of the programs and funding and activities for all CDBG, home, and ESG projects. So there's that interconnectedness is needed. So just putting that out there so you guys understand how this works from your perspective when you look at how you're going to do salary determination for code enforcement. I do not have yet the numbers for what we think is going to be eligible, but as soon as I can run those calculations, I'll let you know. We did a sort of somewhat too early one, and we determined it was like 274,000, but I think that was too early in the game. But when I run the next numbers, I'll let you know. I'll let obviously Chris know, because it's all about reimbursement. Chris and code enforcement, they're paid out of the general fund. The CDBG funding is reimbursing the general fund for eligible expenses. And it's us have been trying to run around like, well, hamsters on a wheel, trying to figure out how we make what code enforcement does an eligible activity under CDBG to help offset the taxpayer funding for code enforcement salaries anyway. So that's kind of just how that works with the CDBG program in general. So, all right, just wanted to point that out so everyone knows that there's there's a lot going on here that's maybe not on this piece of paper, so you're aware of everything.
Yeah. But one thing I will point out before we go is that the bottom line for the salaries for 2023 is such that the CDGB funds that are allocated to code enforcement, I believe, have been unchanged for quite some time. And there was a time when that portion that came from CDGB made up better than half of the salary funding for code enforcement. It's like 40% now. And as expenses go up and the cost of employing people continues to rise, CDGB plays a smaller and smaller role in our overall budget. So, I thank you very much for all the contributions that it made, all the good that it has done. But with CDGB being stagnant and everything else going up, it's has less and less impact on our ability to recruit and retain qualified inspectors.
And as soon as I have those numbers for the maximum amount, I'll let you guys know. Yeah. For all we know, it'll be a prediction going forward, because they're already allocated the money they're spending now, or that we're going to try to spend now. But for next year, I might be able to do a calculation. For all we know, it might be 300. It might be $400,000. So when you guys do the budget, you know how I do. This is the minimum you need to spend on a project, and this is the maximum. That's the maximum I have to calculate. So I'll give you that calculation. I'll let Chris know too. Okay. But I'll get you guys a calculation on that once I can run those numbers. And I should be running in the next couple of weeks, because I'm a little behind on doing fourth quarter salaries, but I got to get them all done anyway.
I just would like to comment. It seems as though even if you had 100 inspectors, observers, because you can only do so much, I don't know what the solution is, as far as you identify all these things and then it's out of your hands and then nothing happens. because it goes to the court system.
And it's that, and it's so much more than that. And I think that's what we all need to understand is the complexity of, you know, how this works and how people make choices. So when somebody's business model is such that they're making no investments at all, and I'm not talking about the bad actors who get arrested. I'm talking about, you know, people who had historically made improvements, but now they're making fewer and fewer improvements. That's their business model that's saying, based on this rent and this water bill and these taxes, now I have less money to allocate towards maintenance. And you can't not pay your water bill and you can't not pay your taxes, but you can put off the new roof for another year and then another year and another year. And you could raise rents if everybody was gainfully employed with amazing, you know, Intel and Microsoft jobs. But when they're not, you know, you're going to get the tenant walk out on you. So, I mean, there's a huge economic reason why, you know, the housing stock doesn't improve. It's because it's just not, you know, in their business model, or somebody's willing to take that dive and put a whole bunch of money in, hoping to recapture that investment at some point. But I think, you know, there's players that have been in this long enough that says, I know that's not going to happen, so I'm not going to make the investment. There's, you know, new housing opportunities, new housing projects that are going up. Those have really boosted neighborhoods. We've seen it on Crandall. We're seeing it on North and Mather. We're seeing, you know, First Ward Action Council, you know, making huge gains in the NOMA area. But that's not to say that, you know, everybody has the same funding and the same opportunity. And it's not to say that everybody wants to live in a First Ward Action Council home or qualifies to live in a First Ward Action Council home. So there's a lot that we have to contend with that's out of our control. Why landlords make those decisions, which eventually creates, you know, problems that we have to observe in order to remedy. You know, when they made that decision, the letter from us isn't going to change their mind. When they say I'm paying my taxes first and my water bill second and repairs are third, you know, it's like trying to get blood from a stone. It's just, you know, it's not anything that we have control over. And taking them into court and charging them money and you know, finding them guilty of a certain, you know, deficiency also doesn't bring in more money. So I know I would love to pin it all on the courts, but it's not. It's a systemic problem. It's much bigger than just 100 code officers showing up and pointing out what's wrong. That doesn't, you know, we do what we can. And that's why I said we're a stopgap. We're not the ones, if it was all up to code enforcement, everything would be great, but we're not the ones that do that. We're the ones that say, you've gone as far as you can without fixing that roof. Now we're stopping in and saying, this is the line in the sand. Nobody can live here if you're not going to fix the roof. That's your business decision. And whether the courts find you guilty and charge you $500 for not fixing your roof may not change your mind either. But I'm telling you, if your mind doesn't change, either your business model doesn't change or your attitude, you know, after being fined doesn't change, then I'm telling you now, you can't rent this out anymore. And that's what we're there for. We're protecting the occupants from living in hazardous conditions. We make observations, and if we determine that the deficiency is bad enough that it's creating a safety hazard, a fire hazard, a health hazard, that's when we draw the line in the sand and say, well, now you got no income. Now you get no income. Nobody's living here. And so now they might rethink their business model. And a lot of times they sell. Sometimes they, you know, find ways to make the improvement just enough to keep it afloat. But there's a lot of different variables in how housing gets to the condition that's in. And we have very little control. The only thing we really control in the end is it safe enough to live in? If we get there and it's so unsafe that it can't be lived in, then you would say, thank God code was there, because if not, then that person would continue to rent and rent and rent until somebody told them not to.
I think that just my observation and opinion is that there needs to be in our newspaper and reporting and everything. I mean, there just isn't anything in our area, hardly at all, local reporting or news. I think that you need to have some sort of a public relations. You need to write letter to the editor or do some feature, somehow get the message out exactly what you're saying tonight, because I know I do hear weekly because I'm at Samaritan House on Fayette Street. And the conception is that it's code is not doing their job.
Yeah.
And, you know, I think that if there was a broader scope of just letting the city residents know
Yeah.
exactly, I think it would go a long way.
It could help some people. I know that there's, a lot of people that live in a black and white world, and it's really easy to put it all onto, one thing. It was just, that neighbor or this person or, that one factory that closed or that one, condition that turned. And I think that there are the rest of us or some of us who understand that, almost every problem we discuss these days is multifaceted. We don't have, one cause and effect society. We have multiple things happening all at the same time.
But the condition that what Binghamton looks like is not good. And I'm not directing.
Yeah,
this
no,
at
and
you.
it's not isolated to Binghamton. It's Newburgh and Niagara Falls and Utica and
And
Elmira
it's
and Auburn.
sad for those that are lifelong residents.
Yeah.
It's really sad for us to see it. There's no pride in the neighborhoods.
Yeah.
It's just so deteriorating. It's very discouraging. So it's my soapbox. Sorry.
No, that's okay. John, you had a comment?
Yeah, I'm just curious, to what extent are your inspectors tied up in the court process when they have that backlog? Are they dragged in for these hearings? So they're taken off the street?
one day a week. They're not in the field every Wednesday.
Okay. That's cool.
Everyone. So really the code inspector working a 5-day week actually has 4 days in the field because every Wednesday we're in court providing testimony, participating in the discovery process, which is where the prosecution gets to ask the defendant, whether or not certain conditions still exist. 5 times out of 10, they swear that everything's done. And it's up to the code inspector to say, no, that's weird. I was just there like an hour ago and all of that didn't get done. And that's, helpful because when prosecution's in there, if everything was corrected, they might recommend a more lenient punishment. So we have to step in and say that's not the case. Here's the more accurate depiction of what's taking place.
So it's a lot more than just observing. It's observing and then following through time to time.
Yeah, there's a lot of documentation that I tell my staff at training that probably the most important thing is how well you document everything. People are obligated to be given due process, proper notification. Files have to be maintained, photographs have to be labeled. We need to be very accurate about where we are, what we saw, who we spoke with, and how things have progressed. Phone conversations that have taken place, emails, all these things, really help tell the story of what transpired so that we don't ever get in the position of saying, of not giving somebody their due process. And we're very meticulous about making sure that everybody is given every opportunity they can to understand what's going on and what their choices are, so that when they fail to do it, it's never a case of ignorance. Nobody told me. It's more a case of you made the choice to not remedy the problem, and that is more punishable than somebody who said, "Well, I just didn't know." Although right, ignorance is not a defense, but we don't even give them, the possibility of making that a defense. Yeah.
And I will say, Mr. Schleider, that your people have always been, we had the First Ward Neighborhood Watch before COVID. Your guys would come to every meeting and they would meet the people, they would talk with the people and they would explain what they do and they would listen to complaints, and they were wonderful. They really were. And I think that was one of the ways, if a community is involved, your people will come out and work with them.
Absolutely.
And that's one of the things that we lack in Binghamton. We have a community that complains a lot, but doesn't really do anything about it. So it's not your fault.
Yeah. Well, and if it's not really fixing the problem, it's a way of understanding what your resources are as
a lot of people who never, a lot of people in the neighborhoods who never, they were putting up with so many things. They began to feel comfortable contacting your office and having those guys come out, and those guys work hard.
Yeah.
So we appreciate that.
They come in after hours. We did North Side, Safe Streets, Noma.
We appreciate everything you've told us today, and we will also try to be ambassadors and tell people that it's not all your fault and that we need to do more.
Sorry,
Michelle.
Can I just ask you one more quick question? Whose responsibility is it for the blight, the vacant properties?
Yeah, there's actually one designated officer. He's a vacant property officer, and he is incredible. He actually works in the housing and planning department. He's not really under the umbrella of code enforcement. It's a very specialized position. It requires a lot of research to understand who is responsible for these parties. There's, multiple lending institutions that hide behind the veil of the former owner. If somebody were to foreclose on my house, Wells Fargo would never admit that they now possess and control that house. If you look at Broome County GIS, they'll leave my name on there. And so when the vacant property officer is looking for somebody to hold responsible for the conditions, then, he's really got to be part private investigator, part, attorney to start peeling back the layers and finding out that, oh, look at that, Mr. Schleider actually lost the house in a foreclosure 8 years ago. And ever since then, it's been Wells Fargo who's been dropping the ball and not maintaining the property. So he's really gifted, and he does an incredible job of finding out who the responsible parties are. Again, so nobody can use the defense. You never told me. I was never notified. He gets down to the bottom of it and holds those parties responsible.
Thank you so much. Any other?
That's a full-time position. Yeah.
Yes. Can we let this poor man go now? Thank you so much for everything. We appreciate it. Thank you.
So, can I stand here? Can I sit here? Okay.
You're asking?
Do you need to introduce here?
Yes.
Okay.
I'll wait until Deb is done.
I didn't. 10 minutes. I should put, well,
I
there might
think
be
you've
some long
already-
meetings come up.
We've already started. I mean, all of the explanation we've already done.
Yeah. This
And
one,
we-
I'm not
and
gonna.
we- And we know where you live. I mean, you're here with us all the time, so it's not a big deal. What's that? Oh, really? I want a Chick-fil-A to come up there. Although I don't like their business practices, I do like their chicken. There's something about it. Yeah, the chicken. When I go to North Carolina. They're closed. It must be hard to find good people that. People don't have the same work opportunities. Your commercial, you have to do. Okay, if I can have your attention, we've just been informed that Steve is going to do the planning presentation.
Well, actually, no, I'm just doing the admin. The planning will have to be scheduled
Well,
for another day.
Okay,
Yeah. So I'll just jump to the admin.
okay.
Okay. So I am no longer the manager of HUD administration and housing. I'm not the top. It's like they move HUD administration and housing under planning, but I'm still basically exactly where I was in the exact same position. So unfortunately, planning is not here tonight. But I will be handling the HUD admin and housing stuff I do apologize that it was late in getting this out to you. I've been busy. I'm always busy, I feel like, but I'm not going to read this verbatim because it's dull and boring. However, I want to point out some points here. On part B, describing overall budget, that's the budget for normal salaries and all the other weird stuff in the A lines. Sorry if I'm jump to those things. If anyone doesn't know what the A lines are, the A lines means it's coming out of the general fund. So when they do our budgets for departments, the general fund funds our departments. So that's the A line. It's 175,998, but that doesn't include benefits. That's a separate section of the A lines. So it should be the one that has a really bad thing that says HUD in the upper right corner. Should be like the third or fourth one. If you don't have one, I've got a few extra. Are you missing it? Yeah, right there, that one. Yep. Okay, so that's part B. Going to part D, define the areas of population to be served and how they weren't identified. That just is a standard HUD identification of residency requirements. However, I'm going to go ahead and jump in here related to what code enforcement was saying, so you guys understand. When it comes to improving the housing stock, it doesn't always have to be sticks. One way you can do it is carrots. Anytime there is a HUD-backed federal program that is providing, say, for example, rental assistance, what that does is it forces the owner of the property the person is renting at or wants to rent at to bring that unit up to minimum HQS standards. Minimum HQS standards aren't great, but they are a minimum. They are healthy, as in they're not unhealthy. There's not giant holes in the wall. There aren't cracks in the windows. There's not chipping paint for the kids to eat. All of those things meet HQS standards. So whenever you're funding a program, a housing program, SHOTO programs, homelessness prevention or rapid rehousing programs, anything that involves helping someone get rental assistance or rental units, what that does is it forces that unit to meet a minimum threshold of quality. They're not the best. It's kind of, it reminds me, the properties oftentimes will remind me of like Habitat homes, where Habitat, I believe they still do this. The homes are bare. I mean, I don't even think they put paint on the inside of them. That's up to the person who buys the house, but they're warm. They're homes. They're 4 walls and a roof, and there's no cracks and all that other stuff. So understand, for any of the programs that you guys are going to make recommendations on funding, anything that involves renters or rental assistance, that's what's going to do it. So when you have more of those programs in an area, it can, in theory, raise the quality of the housing stock. So I just want to jump to that. And then I'm just going to jump to the budget. And I just want to point out, because the budget looks really, really weird. So I want to clarify it. So there's the items on the left that my department works with. There's the thing that says 2023 CDBG budget, 2023 home budget. So that's what's been budgeted through the existing budget now, and the estimated 2024 costs. Now you're going to want to know why some of those cells are merged together. And it's kind of because all that money kind of gets pulled together. So when we're looking at the 2023 CDBG budget, say for those 4 positions can draw from that money. It's not usually set in stone, because the way we do salaries now, we do salaries after the fact. We calculate how much HUD eligible time someone did, do an hourly calculation, and then do a draw from HUD. Does that make sense, everyone? We do the same thing with code enforcement. So I was pointing out how code enforcement salaries, they're derived from a much more complex calculation. But for the people in planning, the people in my office, even BLDC, I forgot to invite. They have to basically prove that what they've done with that time is CDB. Well, yeah, they put it on their timesheets, and then we do a calculation. So the money gets divvied up. And so we're going to hopefully have a much better estimation this year going forward because of this. So this is a fairly recent thing we've been doing. The 2023 home budget has 2 positions that it can divvy up. So that's the housing specialist and the housing coordinator. So yes, the housing specialist and the housing coordinator can be funded with home or CDBG. So that's kind of why there's that kind of confusion there. And I hope that addresses that issue. The other merged cells come down to where it says CDBG home buyer rehab program and home rehab program. And you'll see over there on estimated 2024 costs. The reason I've merged those cells together is because we've been sort of taking from whatever pool needs to be used up sooner. You can rehab with home or CDBG. They're essentially the exact same rules with the way the programs are set up. However, home buyer will almost always be CDBG because it's not worth doing a home buyer program because lots and lots of reasons. It's a pain. It's a nightmare in tracking and monitoring and reviewing. That's just not worth it. And the city can be liable. So we try to avoid those as much as possible. That being said, we have done that with a recent Choto project, and we might do those going forward with Choto projects. So for the estimated 2024 costs, I do apologize. These are sort of back of the envelope calculations I did based off the previous salary pool. We do not yet have a good, accurate, true salary calculation on what is technically eligible. We have like a quarter because we've been having to implement this change to address a HUD finding. So as those numbers come along, I'm hoping in the next year, 2 years, we'll actually start having definitive, this was how much my salaries was, this was how much that were CDBG eligible. So the unknowns is under finance and IT is because we are in the process of figuring out what they're doing that would meet all the eligibility requirements under the HUD requirements. So it may not be 50. If you'll note, I've taken off legal expenses because legal cannot manage to track the time that they need in a way that makes it so that it meets HUD compliance requirements, because legal have 10 million hats each one of them wears, and to track I did 10 minutes on a contract here versus not isn't just not worth it. So the other unknown I have on there is the Choto projects. We do not have any Choto projects identified yet. We are looking to get some, and with the home APR, which hopefully next meeting or the second meeting from now, Jason Wright from Chrysalis will be able to do a presentation. I think it's virtual, but he may fly up too, on the home APR, which is probably going to be a Choto project or Choto projects recommendation. And that can be married with our existing Choto projects money. So hopefully we get that in time so that you guys can make an estimation of whether you want to put any of these funds you're working on now into one of those projects to back it up. I put $0 for fair housing activities because we've been kind of behind on getting that fair housing training class, which everyone liked. We have, we're looking at getting Danielle, who is the housing safety specialist. She is now the fair housing officer. And so me and her and Julia have got to sit down, and we're going to have her kind of take over that and try to figure out how we want to do this every year, how we want to, because we want to do it annually. So we're still in the process of fixing that. The only other item of note that's different from previous years is I have a request for $20,000 for professional services for the consolidated plan. The consolidated plan will be fiscal year 50, which will be next year that you guys start on. That's the 5-year plan. To do that, you need to meet certain things that HUD requires, such as studies, market studies, gap analysis, things such as analysis of impediments to fair housing, those kinds of things. So we need to have basically money in the wallet ready to go at the start of next year to go ahead and start hiring, 1 or 2 professional agencies to do these things that we're going to need to have done to meet HUD requirements for the consolidated plan. So our last analysis of impediments to fair housing for the previous plan was not good. I don't want to go into details, but the previous one before that from 10 years ago was pretty good. And that one did identify some issues we were having. I may have brought this up when I did the data presentation on what we knew. We do know that for fair housing, at least as of 10 years ago, and it's probably still consistently, we do have fair housing issues with race being a deciding factor. That does occur. We do have issues with, but that's not the big one. The two big ones are this access for mobilely impaired individuals. Well, actually, I think it applies to any disability. So for example, someone who is hearing impaired, there may be a requirement for them to have a fire alarm, one of those like disco ball fire alarms that wakes them up. So some landlords don't realize this, and this was part why we wanted the fair housing. And this is the last analysis of impediments kind of indicated what we were doing with the fair housing study. So they determined that landlords didn't know, but we're just being like, oh, you're in a wheelchair? Sorry. That's not exactly fair. In those kinds of situations, especially if an improvement can be done in a reasonable method, grab bars, widening of doorways, those kinds of things that are not going to cost an arm and a leg, they're still supposed to rent to people. The other one was the issue with children. Many landlords do discriminate. I hate to use the word discriminate. We'll say limit their rentals to college students. That's actually legal. You can do that. You're a college student? Yes, I'll take it. Not a college student? I don't care. I won't. But you can't limit it because people have children. Many grad students have children. And there were landlords saying, oh, you've got children? Sorry. That's very, very illegal, just as any of those other ones are. So those were the three top ones. I think the biggest one was the access one. The second one was the children limitation. And the third one were racial issues. So we will have to do that again with the study, with the year coming up. Usually only takes a couple months to do one of these. But hopefully once we have that, we'll have better understanding. So that's an example of one of the studies we're going to have to do. I think we're going to have to do a housing market analysis as well. Again, a couple months, we can hire someone else to do it. It doesn't take a huge, long period of time to do it, but that will then give you data, as well as the city council, because I will present them also to city council, more information on what is actually needed from a calculated, determined survey, scientific method. What is missing? What needs to be done to improve these things? So that's the reason I put the 20,000 in there. I think that's enough to cover what we're going to need. But as I said, you need to put that money in the projects for the upcoming year, because in the upcoming year, that's when we start the, basically what you guys are going to be doing next year. We have to have that money in the bank now or soon in order to do that. So does anyone have any questions? I don't want to hold you guys here longer than possible, but I can answer anything regarding the housing department or the admin department. I see Deb.
Steve, I was wondering if the housing attorney would qualify in part or in whole for the legal. I think you could make a case that it's in many of the CDB approved neighborhoods, and it could be done by address.
Yeah, the issue, it gets complex when you get to like housing issues on what qualifies and what doesn't. That's a good idea. I hadn't thought about looking at just the housing lawyer, or is that the actual title, housing lawyer? I'm not sure if that's
There's a better title.
Yeah, it's got to be a better title. Housing lawyer just sounds weird. But yeah, I think it may come down. Well, that's a really good question, and I had not thought of that. Thank you, Jeff. Let me do a little bit more research, but that might be a good way we can pull that in for that, because typically when we think of legal, we think of our entire CDBG program. We don't usually think of it for a specific angle of it. But let me do some research on that. That might be it. That might be something we could do. Thank you. Anyone else have any questions?
Thank you.
Yeah, so it was supposed to, I thought it was supposed to be Tito, but I think there was some confusion over the thing. So I've got to reschedule in one of the upcoming meetings a slot for planning. And also I completely forgot to invite economic development. So just dawned on me. So I'm gonna have to find spots for both of them to have them come and do this as well. So. And I'm gonna start heading up because I think you guys are gonna get ready to shut down.
Thank
Then I
you.
gotta shut it down up there.
Okay. I guess that's it for today. But before we entertain a motion to adjourn, can we do one more round of attendance, please?
John Brunza, mayoral appointee.
Brandy Brown, District 3.
Justin McGregor, Secretary, District 7.
Kenya Middleton, Vice Chair, Mayor appointee.
Mary Ann Callahan, First Ward.
Michelle O'Loughlin, 5th District.
Marilyn Austin, 6th District.
Dawn Ciccone, District 2.
Deborah Hogan, mayoral appointee.
And can I have a motion to adjourn? Brandy makes the motion.
I'll
Second.
second.
Deb?
Good.
All in favor? Aye.
Who was second on that?
Deborah. Thank you. See you in 2 weeks.
It's 7:43. I will stop.